from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.
At the legislature today, the bill to repeal the prevailing wage isn't on the Senate floor yet, but an attempt to stop it from coming to the floor sparked debate about the measure. In the House today, delegates adopted an amendment that would require the governor to appoint 2 members of the West Virginia Board of Education that have school-age children. These stories and we'll meet the new majority leaders on the legislature today. Good evening, I'm Ashton Mara. Intense passion was displayed by both parties on the Senate floor today as a Democratic lawmaker tried a new tactic to kill a bill that would repeal the state's prevailing wage. Minority Leader Jeff Kessler moved to reject a committee report containing the bill, a move some senior senators remarked they'd never seen in their years in the chamber. Should the senator's motion be accepted, the repeal legislation would die on the Senate floor, leaving the majority party to reconsider how to achieve a major proposal in its agenda. Here's what both Democratic and Republican senators had to say before the vote.
So again, I don't know why we need to run this train. Again, I believe the repeal of this is radical, it's wrong, and it's not in the best interest of the people of the state of West Virginia. If there's no compromise in this bill, what this bill right now is an absolute repeal. And I've heard some suggestion that maybe there might be an opportunity to do some compromise, but this bill is not a compromise. This bill is an outright abolition of the prevailing wage law that served our state well for decades and decades, Mr. President.
When will be the opportunity to find and hang on to that compromise? Well, we'll do it on the floor, I was told. That's sloppy on such a very, very large issue that we all knew was coming. This is not something that happened overnight. It is not a water crisis that suddenly the river's full of chemicals that just happened and we had to react. This has been coming. There was plenty of time for compromise, but that compromise was not seen nor embraced. But what we have done, Mr. President, is put fear in the hearts of tens of thousands of West Virginia citizens, our citizens, Mr. President. Their fear is that they do not know if this repeal bill passes, what their wages will be.
I came to this body proud to be a member of the West Virginia Senate. Proud to be a member of a body, unlike the House, and I don't want to throw the House under the bus, but unlike the House, we didn't have these petty fights. We were deliberative, we were thoughtful, and we thought about all angles of what we were doing. We looked, how do we come and bring people together? How do we create compromise? How do we create a path where everyone who comes before this body can have something that works, something that is successful, something that builds this state to even greater success. This bill did not have that compromise in it. I appreciate the committee chair allowing the discussion that took place, but in the end it was not about compromise. It was simply about progressing a piece of legislation.
I would suggest that this bill is nothing but another form of outsourcing. This bill is going to outsource so many of our good jobs with benefits to documented and undocumented workers, to folks from all around the country, Mexico, etc. And I think that would be a mistake.
Every time we have a bill of huge concern, I get my emails, I get my phone calls, I get all the notice of support for or against a certain bill. I can look all across the aisle and all of my colleagues. I never got one email I never got one phone call asking me to support the abolition of prevailing wage. Now, what would that tell you as a legislator when you don't get one?
This bill is set up for the ability to have amendments on it in the body of a whole, not a committee of 14, not a committee of 17, not a committee of 3. The body of the whole is going to be able to amend this bill, work it through, work it together in front of these TV cameras here. If that's the show we want, that's great. We're going to, again, this is open government to where everybody's going to have an opportunity to participate on this, not just half of the Senate and then come in here to this chamber and pass something through like it's been done years in the past.
At its core, if we're going to debate the issue, this is a simple question, a very simple question. Should workers on public projects be paid the same, more, or less than they are on private projects? Now, how would you answer that? More? If you say more, then where does that money come from? From where does the money come from? And we've heard a discussion about the bag boy at Aldi's making $10 or $11 or $12 an hour. He pays taxes. The taxpayer will be subsidizing the wage rate on public projects. Is that fair?
This bill, if passed, will create jobs in this state. It will create jobs. We have incredible infrastructure needs in this state. Water, sewer, schools. This bill, if adopted and passed into law, will stretch farther the tax dollars of the hardworking citizens of this state. If the gentleman's motion is adopted, it will delay further action on this measure. And Mr. President, the people of West Virginia are waiting. They've been waiting for generations. The time to act is now. We would make the people wait no further, no longer, for action to improve the business climate, to create jobs, to build the infrastructure that this state needs. The time is now.
Senators rejected Kessler's motion on a partisan vote of 16 to 18. The bill to repeal prevailing wage, Senate Bill 361, will be on first reading in the Senate tomorrow. Between prevailing wage, tort reform, changes to the state's education system, there's no shortage of controversial issues at the State House this legislative session. The new majority is pushing their agenda through both chambers at a grueling pace, and so far, 3 pieces of legislation have been approved by both the House and Senate. Here this evening to discuss some of the issues lawmakers are currently debating are the lawmakers leading the charge in their parties, the majority leaders. Senator Mitch Carmichael is from Jackson County. He was first elected to the House of Delegates in 2000 and made the switch to the Senate in 2012. Delegate Darrell Coles is from Morgan County and was first elected to the House in 2006. He previously served as the minority whip. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
It's good to be with you.
Let's start with what we just saw from the Senate today in the prevailing wage. Senator, can you respond to some of the Democratic concerns? They're saying we don't hear from anybody who supports this bill. So why are we running the legislation?
Well, Ashton, at its core, this is a discussion about, as I've said today in the legislative debate, should a worker be paid more or the same for working on a public project or a private project? And what we're simply saying to the people of West Virginia is what prevails in the market, that has been so distorted, the wage that should prevail in the market is what should be paid on a public project such that the taxpayer truly does get the money's worth for their investment. And as several said today, it is so important that we build the infrastructure, that we build the schools, that we improve the public works projects here in West Virginia and allow our people to go to work. This is a jobs bill.
But what are you hearing from your constituents? Are you hearing from anyone who supports the bill?
Absolutely. From the municipalities to the counties to the school systems to those who want fairness in taxpayer expenditures. I mean, frankly, if anyone that distorts this provision such that we are paying 300% higher in some cases for the wage rate on a public project versus a private project, it's simply unfair to the taxpayer. This is an issue of fairness. It will put people to work and bring more jobs to our communities. I'm excited about passing it.
Delegate, the Senate is kind of taking the lead on this bill right now, but I'm assuming that people are getting in touch with you in the House already to talk about it. What are you all hearing?
Well, we hear much of the same concerns. It is a taxpayer issue. And while the Senate has taken the lead for now on the prevailing wage bill, I expect it'll be a hot topic in the House very soon.
Is there room for compromise? As the bill stands, the prevailing wage would expire April 1st of 2015. Is there room for compromise in this bill right now?
Well, certainly, and we've said as we're approaching this legislative session, we want to incorporate all great ideas into the measures that we advance. And so to the extent that others have some ideas on how to reform this, short of repealing it, or to make it a better provision that absolutely protects the taxpayers and promotes jobs and opportunity as it is in its current form, Ashton, we are very willing to hear both sides of the issue on this, and we really feel good about the inclusive nature of the way we're approaching all of our legislative agenda.
It'll go through the regular legislative process next week, have the ability to amend on second reading, but Delegate, as it stands today, a pure repeal bill, would the House pass that bill?
Well, Ashton, I think we have the votes, but I think there is room for a common ground where we could make some changes and perhaps address the taxpayer issue, but we struggle with if it's a taxpayer's issue, where do you draw the line? To which taxpayers do you treat fairly, and which ones do you continue to treat unfairly? That's a difficult line to draw. I think we would like to address the issue in a serious manner right away, if that's what we can do. And if it takes more time to treat all the taxpayers fairly, we'll take our time, but we want to get there and get a good value for the tax dollar for all public projects.
I'd like to move on to a bill that was introduced in the House earlier this week and the Senate just today, and that bill would, what Democrats, some Democrats, and outside interest groups are saying is gut the above-ground storage tank legislation that was passed last year. Delegate, it first came from your chamber. Bob Ashley is the one who is supporting that bill. Why do we need this change?
Well, I haven't read the bill, but I know it was introduced recently, and I think it's in response to some of the concerns we've heard about the overreach of the original bill. You know, it included a lot of tanks in a lot of areas, and we heard from farmers that you know, it even included cattle troughs and tanks that weren't necessarily needed to be regulated to the extent that other tanks needed to be regulated. I think the ones that are in the critical area, zone of critical concern, certainly need attention. And if there's an area where we can find some common ground for protecting our resources, but yet not treating the farmers and others with tanks that pose no real threat, I think we might find common ground on that.
Senator, the Secretary of the DEP, Randy Huffman, said today that of the 5,300 tanks his agency calls concerning, with this change in legislation, only 1,800 would continue to be tracked by his department. Is that number not concerning?
Certainly it's concerning, and as my colleague in the House, Darrell, talked about, there were unintended consequences with the bill that was passed in a hasty fashion last year after the water crisis. And so there is absolutely zero chance that we are going to do anything to damage or hurt the water intake systems in West Virginia. That is not going to happen. There is nobody that is in favor of dirty water. We are going to ensure that we have clean drinking water here in West Virginia and our water resources are protected, but we're not going to regulate cattle troughs and facilities that are storing clean water and milk and those type things. I mean, it's just, that is ridiculous on its face. And so we're going to make sure the water is protected and give others an opportunity to store clean water and other liquids that will do no damage to the environment and are nowhere close to a critical water intake system.
Let's talk about the budget a little bit. Senator, how seriously are you all looking at the Greyhound breeders and purse fund as a way to balance the budget this year?
Well, very seriously. We're taking a look at all options to balance this budget, which is in such, and has been, in a bad condition over the past several years. And, Ashton, that's really the reason we come to work every day with a sense of urgency about getting this economy moving. This isn't something that we can just take our time and keep the status quo. We want to approach this task of putting West Virginia on the path of progress and stop always having to balance a horrible budget condition on the backs of vital programs. And so the Greyhound Breeders Fund is one that I think needs to be seriously looked at for reduction, elimination, and capturing that money. Now, how that works through the process, we'll have to see how it comes out.
Yeah, Delegate, a lot of bipartisan support in the House for plenty of bills this year. Is this a place where the House could find bipartisan support?
Well, indeed, there has been some bipartisan support on some major reforms we're moving. The budget hasn't been really talked about too much, but this may be one where we can find common ground, and I would expect in the budget struggles there will be others where we find common ground, but there is a bit of an urgency to find some revenues and spend the money more wisely. This is one I think that'll get serious consideration in the House as well.
There was some talk today about the possibility of meeting on the weekend, that the Senate is going to start having weekend meetings. There's this real urgency, this real push to get through this session. Delegate, same in the House? Are we looking at weekend meetings to get through this agenda?
Well, we haven't talked about that, but there's certainly an urgency. I think we feel a great need to respond to the needs of West Virginia, and it's been so long and we've heard so loudly from the people that they need these changes. Folks across West Virginia are struggling. There are answers on the table that could alleviate some of those struggles, get our folks back to work, change the education system, find a better hope for tomorrow for so many West Virginians. There's an urgency to get that work done, and we're tackling it as quickly as we can.
Majority Leader Gerald Coles, Majority Leader Mitch Carmichael, thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you, Ashton.
Thanks, Ashton.
News from the House coming up. First, here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the Senate today.
Among the bills introduced in the Senate today, Senate Bill 417 to remove certain discounts from the motor fuel excise tax as it relates to permissive suppliers or suppliers to licensed distributors. Senate Bill 420 to provide retirement benefits for persons employed as an aide or early classroom assistant teacher and Braille or sign support specialist in kindergarten programs. Senate Bill 421 to clarify when punitive damages may be awarded in civil actions and to limit the amount of punitive damages that may be awarded to comport with the due process rights of defendants. And Senate Bill 424 to eliminate the statutory requirements for tuberculosis testing for school children and school personnel who are at low risk for tuberculosis. This type of testing is no longer recommended, and the cost of conducting the testing is unjustified by the results. There's never been an active case of tuberculosis discovered through this test. Up for passage in the Senate tomorrow, Senate Bill 250 to prohibit conservation district supervisors from voting for a contract in which he or she or an immediate family member is beneficially interested. Senate Bill 279, similar to a bill the House has passed, the bill removes the term labor interests in the state to require the commissioner to have training and experience in employee-employer management relations. Senate Bill 374 to allow in absentia parole hearings in certain instances and waiving a personal appearance by an inmate who is terminally ill and unable to attend. And Senate Bill 375 to specify who receives notice of parole hearings via regular or certified mail. Among the bills on second reading tomorrow, Senate Bill 287 to provide for the awarding of a posthumous high school diploma to parents of a high school senior who dies during the senior year, and House Bill 2002 to establish the comparative fault standard and abolish joint liability. Fault is expressed as a percentage, and in any action seeking damages for personal injury, property damage, or wrongful death, recovery shall be predicated upon principles of comparative fault, and the liability of each person who caused the damages shall be allocated to each person in direct proportion to that person's percentage of fault.
Anyone visiting the state capitol that is licensed to carry a concealed weapon would be allowed to keep loaded firearms in their motor vehicles that are parked near the complex. That bill overwhelmingly passed the House today. Liz McCormick reports.
Delegate Gary Howell of Mineral County cited the bill as a safety issue.
This bill addresses a problem that we have. We have our constituents come down from all over the state. Normal, average, everyday West Virginians that have their concealed carry permit. They know that they can't bring them in the buildings, but they don't know they can't park in the parking lots. This addresses that issue. So they know they can come to the Capitol, and if sometime there is a very late night meeting and it's dark and whatever, they know when they get back to their car they're at a point of safety, and I urge passage.
House Bill 2128 passed 97-0. On second reading, or the amendment stage, was House Bill 2151, which would make the West Virginia Teacher of the Year an ex officio, non-voting member of the West Virginia Board of Education. Delegate Doug Reynolds, a Democrat from Cabell County, stood to offer an amendment to suggest a change in the qualifications of some members of the Board of Education.
The purpose of my amendment is to also add in that 2 members of the 13 must also be parents when they are appointed of children currently under the jurisdiction of the Board of Education.
Reynolds' amendment received major support from both sides of the aisle, passing 97-1. The one rejection vote was from Delegate Joe Statler, a Republican from Monongalia County. Currently, the governor appoints the members of the state school board with the advice and consent of the Senate. Reynolds suggests that the governor must consider board members who actually have school-age children. He thinks it would help bring a new perspective.
I think that parents bring a perspective of what's going on in the schools, not necessarily what might not be in those rule books and what might be in those policies, but how those policies are affecting kids on a day-to-day basis.
Reynolds says he has nothing against the current school board, but he thinks his amendment will help aim to make the school system better.
I think it shows that we value the input of parents, because almost all of the experts I talk to complain about parent engagement. And I think this is showing some leadership and saying we value you, we want your views on the school board.
With committee passage of the repeal of the prevailing wage in the Senate yesterday, and that issue poised for a vote on the Senate floor next week, Delegate Mike Caputo warned his House colleagues that the bill is on its way.
The Senate passed a bill repealing the prevailing wage in West Virginia. A wage that workers depend on to feed their families, that workers depend on to make sure their kids have the same opportunities as rich folks' kids have to go to college and have a nice home and a nice car. And they're deeply concerned and they're deeply worried. And I know you all have gotten the letters that I've gotten. And I've gotten more letters from businesses who are concerned about the repeal of the prevailing wage, on what it will do to good West Virginia businesses that's been here a long time and has provided a good workplace for those men and women. So I would caution us to think long and hard about how we proceed when that bill comes over here.
For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Liz McCormick in the House.
And here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the House today.
Among the bills introduced in the House today, House Bill 2610 to make information related to permits to carry concealed weapons confidential and not subject to public disclosure. House Bill 2611 to require a prescription for pseudoephedrine and other precursors of methamphetamine. House Bill 2617 to lengthen residency requirements for a student to be eligible for a Promise Scholarship Award. The student must have lived in the state for 2 years. House Bill 2618 to establish a West Virginia Animal Abuse Registry requiring registration of persons convicted of certain crimes of animal abuse. And House Bill 2631, the governor's bill to provide limited immunity from prosecution for certain misdemeanor offenses for a person who seeks emergency medical assistance for someone who's experiencing a drug or alcohol overdose, as well as other clemency options. Up for passage in the House tomorrow, House Bill 2004, requiring that the legislature consider the state's plan to conform to the U.S. EPA's carbon emission standards that are written by the State Department of Environmental Protection. House Bill 2008, that beginning May 1, 2015, the Division of Highways shall provide access to all of the division's books, accounts, records, and any other information requested by an independent qualified auditing firm. A report about the efficiency audit is due to the legislature and the governor by December 31, 2015. And House Bill 2151, making the West Virginia Teacher of the Year a non-voting member of the State Board of Education. On second reading, the amendment stage, House Bill 2011, the deliberate intent bill requiring proof that an employer had deliberately intended to injure an employee in respect to insurance claims.
This has been the Legislature Today. Tomorrow, we wind up the week with a visit from two of our colleagues covering this legislative session. David Beard is the State House reporter for the Morgantown Dominion Post, and Eric Eyre is the State House reporter with the Charleston Gazette. I'm Ashton Mara. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following:
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.